to Conversations. The second wave of coronavirus is causing a lot of distress to everybody around. This is the time for empathy. It is a time to reach out and help out those who we can. Today, we're going to speak to Dr. Ketan Desai to understand the nature of the virus, to understand the outlook and what it is going to look like in the next couple of months. Welcome, Dr. Desai. Welcome to the conversation.
Welcome.
The second wave of coronavirus in India, I want to specifically talk about the causes and, the outlook. And what do you think has led to this massive surge all of a sudden?
There are many causes for the surge. It's not just one cause. One of the causes is that India became complacent and people started mingling around, started having these big religious festivals, political rallies, etc. And collectively, the guard was let down. People were not being careful enough, and so this led to a surge. The other thing is that whenever a virus stays in a population for an extended period of time, it allows mutants to develop. And it looks like we have a mutant now in India, which is a double mutant. And actually, that's a bit of a misnomer because quite a few of the mutants are double and triple mutants. So it's not specific to India. But anyway, the mutant that's in India is a little bit different than those found in other parts of the world. And so this mutant is probably more transmissible and also more lethal than the original strain, or at least that's the proposed. Now, when I say original strain, I mean the original Wuhan strain that came out. The strain that came after the Wuhan strain, which is what infected Europe and then US, was the D614G strain. That is the real parent strain that led to the pandemic. It was not the Wuhan strain. And that has mutated into many different forms subsequently, including the South African variant, the Brazilian variant, two new variants in the US, the California variant and the New York variant. And yesterday we found another variant in Texas, which is now the deadliest of them all. So in the Indian strain is actually not as bad as the Brazilian variant, for example. But it is more transmissible than the original, or rather the Wuhan strain, and it is more lethal than the Wuhan strain as well. So the combination of factors, people letting their guard down, and also the fact that the virus has time to mutate into something more dangerous is what's causing this problem right now.
So let's talk a little bit about the outlook. You said the virus will mutate. So what will it look like, say, 2 months down the line? And also, what are we looking at? Is this going to keep mutating into different versions and again, every time there's going to be a spike like the way we have currently?
Yeah, that is an excellent question, and nobody really knows the answer to that. Viruses do mutate. All viruses mutate, but they mutate at different rates. And most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, the virus will mutate into a less lethal form because it has a survival advantage. If the virus kills its host, then the virus dies too. So generally, the virus tends to mutate into something that's less lethal. That's not happening here. And we see that in other cases too, like Ebola mutates into something more deadly. It doesn't always work out to be to humans' advantage. And as far as how many times or how often the virus mutates, it's all up in the air. There is no fixed number, there is no fixed ratio. It can keep mutating forever, actually. So there is unfortunately, no fixed timeline by which we can say, okay, this is when it will stop. So because of that, because the virus will keep mutating, we won't truly have a herd immunity, in my opinion. So this whole concept of where we were about a year ago hoping for herd immunity, that may not take place at all. And so we may be left with this virus for eternity. Just like we've been living with rabies forever and with TB forever and malaria forever, this might be one of those things. And the course of the virus, we actually don't know because it's still evolving and may keep evolving in the future. It may be that we do reach some kind of a balance with the virus and the human race where we say, okay, certain number of affected population, which is prone to illnesses based on body weight, diabetes, etc., are more prone than others. But I think we should be prepared for the fact this virus is here to stay.
So in that case, will vaccination be effective? And
that's another very good question. About a year ago, I would have said yes. Now I'm not so sure. These mutants are evading the antibodies because antibodies are based on two things, which I don't know if your general audience knows or not. One is the structure of the antigen, or actually the epitope, which is about an 8 to 10 amino acid long sequence. So it's based on the sequence, but also on the three-dimensional structure of the sequence. So when one protein, or rather one amino acid mutates, it changes both the sequence as well as the three-dimensional structure. So now imagine if you have a wrench and a nut, or a spanner and a nut. Now that the nut's shape has changed, the spanner won't fit the nut anymore. So the antibody can't bind the antigen anymore, so it becomes ineffective against the mutant. So the whole purpose of vaccination was to increase the antibodies and the T cell responses. But if they don't bind the virus anymore, then they become ineffective.
So in regards to that, the vaccination might not work that well, but then we could get a booster shot, or maybe the vaccine can be tweaked to be effective for the particular virus mutation. Is that correct? Can that happen?
Yes, in theory, it can happen. The practicality is much more difficult. Now, if we have the mRNA vaccine, it's easy to do that because that's made in the lab and can be tweaked actually within days. So that's the easy one. The ones which are in India, the Chadox, or rather the Serum Institute vaccine and the Bharat Biotech vaccine, those are much more difficult to treat. They are much more difficult to re-engineer and make. So that's one aspect of the problem. The other aspect, which is more challenging, is you know how difficult it is to vaccinate for flu every year, because the flu mutates also every year. And so we kind of guess as to what the mutation is going to be, and then we make the vaccine. But it takes about 6 months to make the new vaccine for the new strain. And then just think about the practicality of it, how much trouble India has had to vaccinate its present. So if you have to do that every few months, every year, 2 times a year, 3 times a year, it's just not going to be practical. And the third thing is the economics of it. How is India going to afford vaccinating 1.4 billion people twice a year?
But tell me then, in regards to age group, which age group is most vulnerable? I mean, I would think it would be the older people, but then we are hearing reports of a lot of the younger lot,
Yes.
Succumbing to the disease. And so how is that happening? What is going on?
Yeah, so the original strain was affecting older people more, age 65 and above. They were the prime target. This new strain appears to be attacking younger people more. So it's not clear if it is attacking younger people more, or younger people are more outgoing, carefree, careless, whatever you want to say. And they may think that they are resistant to the virus and they are not taking the adequate precautions, and so they are succumbing more. We don't know the answer to that. We are still looking into it. But the third thing that's possible, we don't know the answer, but it's possible, is that the younger people also have a more robust immune response, which actually may be counterproductive because the higher immune response may lead to a cytokine storm, which actually proves to be deadly. We don't know the answer to this. I'm speculating here because they are still looking into all this right now.
And of all the vaccines that are available at the moment, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, which, in your opinion, is one of the best vaccines? Of course, they're all effective.
Right now, I would say either the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine are probably the best. I don't know that much about the Bharat Biotech, so I'm going to give a disclaimer there. I haven't seen that much published data. It might be a very good vaccine, but I haven't seen that much published data on it. So I'm going to take what's called a mulligan in the golf terminology on that one. The AstraZeneca vaccine has had a lot of issues. As you probably know, the way the studies were conducted, it's not proving to be effective in South Africa, for example, and so it was actually pulled out of South Africa. Then you have had these issues with the Johnson & Johnson vaccines with its manufacturing. So that's an issue there. The vaccine itself may be fine, but there are lots of other issues, including reports of blood clots, including reports of neurological problems. So it's going to make people more wary of taking the vaccine when you have these reports coming out. The reports are the least with the mRNA vaccines as compared to the other vaccines. And as far as the Russian Sputnik vaccine is concerned, there's very little data in the public domain about it. Again, they have not been as open, forthcoming, or whatever word you want to use there with the data. So other than what's reported in some of the lay press, we actually haven't been able to see it in scientific journals well enough. So I'm leery about that.
This is really something that, I really want your opinion on. In regards to management of the spread and the pandemic, how different has it been in the US versus what we've done in India? That's one. And secondly, how can we sort of, do it better here in India? What more can we do?
The US response has been extremely haphazard. Under the previous administration, they actually thought this was the flu or nothing better than the flu. And there was a lot of political pressure on the scientific community to downplay the virus, and many states were not complying with any of the mandates like masking or social distancing, etc. Things are being taken more seriously now, but still there are some states which are basically flouting the rules and saying, do what you want. So the response here has been extremely haphazard and inconsistent. So you will see these spikes in certain states coming up and going down and coming up and going down. So we saw that in New York was high, then it became low, and now it's high again. California was low, became very high, and now it's low again. So it's been going up and down all over the US. It's not been consistent. India has the problem of very high population density, extremely high. It's at least three times, maybe 9 times higher than the US. So it's going to be much more challenging to maintain that in India. The other problem is that social distancing and hygiene is not as good in India as it is in the US. People don't routinely wash their hands well. If you look at the people's masks, they are not something you really want to touch because they're just pieces of cloth that look like they've been through the road or whatever. So I'm not sure how well hygiene is really being looked after in India, how well people are taking care of it. And then you have people really flouting the rules, like having marriages, political rallies, these religious gatherings where all the rules are flouted. And so if someone is taking a dip in a river with a mask on, the mask becomes useless at that point. It's not going to do anything. So if India really wants to control the pandemic, the old rules are still golden, which is social distancing, wear a mask properly, and keep good sanitary hygiene. The only other two things I would add is from a personal hygiene point of view is avoid smoking and alcohol. They both suppress the immune system pretty badly, especially alcohol. Because I was reading in news reports in Delhi, people lining outside liquor stores before they close, just so that they could get their liquor fixed. It's probably one of the worst things they can do, drinking alcohol. And the other thing, personal hygiene they can do is exercise. So exercise for about 30 minutes a day, and I do mean exercise, I don't mean golf, has been shown to decrease the incidence of severe COVID by about 3 times. So a person who lifts weights, jogs, runs on a treadmill, bikes, or whatever, has 3 times less chance of getting infected compared to someone else. So in addition to social distancing and hygiene, exercise, don't drink alcohol or smoke, and eat well.
The situation that we're in now, world over, with this pandemic, how is it that we can be better prepared so that the next time something like this hits?
Yeah, it has to start with the acknowledgement from the very top that pandemics do happen and we do need to be prepared. So when we had the Middle East respiratory virus, MERS, and this previous version of SARS, certain countries experienced it, most of the world did not. So people like South Korea, they were much more prepared than this one had because they had the procedures and policies in place to deal with it. If you go to Japan, you'll see people wear masks routinely. You go to South Korea, you'll see people wear masks routinely. So their sense of personal hygiene as well as their policies are really pretty good. They still got hit, but it was still pretty good compared to India and even America. So that policies have to be there in place. Actually, America did have a policy in place. The Obama administration had policies in place saying what you should do and what you shouldn't do in case of an epidemic. But Trump administration basically didn't follow any of it, totally ignored it. So we do need to have policies in place and implement them, not just ignore them. And so this applies to India too. Maybe this is a good wake-up call for India to really emphasize personal hygiene, because I don't think that's one of our strong points, personal hygiene.
Right. And I mean, Israel has managed to go sort of mask free. So they've done a good job in that sense, because I think they vaccinated a large number of their population early on. So that sort of took care of, is that correct? Is that so vaccination is the answer in some level? Like 70% of the population needs to either be infected or vaccinated to sort of stem the rise.
Yeah, so let's talk about Israel first. Vaccination of Israel took place before these mutant strains really became prevalent. So it's not entirely fair to compare Israel to the rest of the world. And so when these, and they are looking at mutant strains in Israel, the double mutant strain from India has now reached Israel, and they're finding that it's not as easy to contain as the original strain. So, and Israel is a small country. I don't know what its population is, like 5 million, 7 million. It's easy to manage a population, a country of that size. Managing 1.4 billion people is a lot more difficult. So that's as far as Israel is concerned. This whole concept of herd immunity arises from something called the infectivity or the R ratio. And they say, okay, this virus replicates at so-and-so rate, and it is going to infect so many people, so we need to immunize so many people to make sure the virus doesn't replicate. And so the 70% was based on the original strain of the virus, which is not that transmissible. The mutant strains are very transmissible, so the 70% goes out the window right there. Secondly, we have been somewhat cavalier, I'm talking of the scientific community, in kind of overemphasizing this herd immunity business, because not every virus has a herd immunity. For example, the common flu, there is no herd immunity to the common flu. There is no herd immunity really to influenza. Rabies, there's no herd immunity to rabies. So it doesn't always take place. There are many viruses to which there is no herd immunity. And so if we hang our hat, so to speak, on the concept of herd immunity, we could be going down a really dangerous path because it may not happen. The other thing is that we expect that the vaccination immunological response from the vaccine for the herd immunity to take place to last for years. It may not. The vaccine may be effective for 6 to 8 months, and then we're back to square one. And so for all those reasons, I would try to de-emphasize this whole concept of herd immunity. It may not take place.
Yeah, so the other thing is that, like in India, at the moment, we are spending about less than 2% of the GDP on healthcare. So we, of course, need to increase funding and better our health infrastructure. Because you must have seen in the news, there's been a lot of complaints of oxygen, running out. The medical staff is overworked, and our health infrastructure as it is about to sort of collapse. So do you agree with that? If we increase the spend on and better our health infrastructure, that could be one of the main sort of key ways in which we can be ready for any other eventuality.
I think more important than spending more on healthcare is how we spend on healthcare. I don't think India needs to spend more on healthcare by buying oncology drugs that cost $400,000 a year or $200,000 a year. It's not going to help India a whole lot. So we need to target our healthcare better. And India's prime need still is infectious disease. It is not oncology. And even though a lot of Indians do have heart disease, if you exercise and eat properly, that will go away. So we don't need to be doing expensive angioplasties and all this stuff when more people in India die from tuberculosis and malaria and infectious disease, Shigella and stuff like that, than from these really expensive cardiology and oncology diseases. So we need to focus still on infectious disease and epidemiology and maintain hygiene, sanitation, good water, water purification, tackling air pollution. Air pollution is a huge problem with COVID-19 because people whose lungs are damaged from COVID-19, from pollution, and have respiratory disease, they become more susceptible to COVID-19. So if you're living in Delhi and breathing that noxious air, well, guess what? You become more susceptible to COVID-19. So those are the things that need to be addressed. I don't think we need to just spend blindly on more healthcare. We need to spend smarter on healthcare.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This was very, very informative.
Thank you for the call. Bye.